Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into the ultimate high-stakes man versus nature journey. We're going to explore just how unbelievably resourceful, weird, and honestly borderline insane ancient human survival methods had to be. Because we are looking at the craziest ways our ancestors managed to claw out a living in a world that was actively, constantly trying to kill them. And I promise you, by the time we wrap this up, you are going to look at your modern camping gear and feel just a little bit embarrassed about ever complaining over a leaky tent.
Okay, so let's set the scene. Picture this. It's the dead of a brutal Ice Age winter in what is now modern-day Ukraine. We're talking roughly 15,000 years ago. The Earth is definitely not some lush tropical paradise with ripe fruit just falling into your lap. It is freezing, and the wind, it isn't just a chilly breeze. It's the kind of intense cold that literally makes the inside of your nose ache the second you take a breath. It turns your exposed skin completely numb in minutes. There's no agriculture. There are absolutely no backup grocery stores.
So, that brings us to the terrifying question that drove our ancestors' daily reality. How on earth do you survive when there's no wood for miles? The trees gave up on this place a long time ago and retreated south to a climate that actually tolerated them. Well, facing this massive lack of basic resources, the human brain did exactly what it does best under extreme stress. It got creative, fast, and it pulled off what I can only describe as the ultimate architectural heist.
Section 1. The Ice Age Stage. Shelter from the cold. Let's look at how early humans engineered a brilliant solution to the baseline threat of exposure. The archaeological site of Majeric in Ukraine proves humans didn't just cower and hide from the cold. They looked at an enormous, dead, woolly mammoth and collectively decided, yep, this is our house now. They basically turned an animal skeleton into a fully functioning supply chain. I mean, think about it. A single mammoth gave them literal tons of meat and fat to eat. They used the heavy hides to completely block out the wind. The massive curved tusks, those became structural ribs to hold up the roof, and the skulls were stacked like foundational bricks to create a dome. Nothing was wasted. It was a one-stop hardware store that just so happened to double as dinner for a few weeks.
Section 2. Fueling the machine. Ancient nutrition. Moving past shelter, we have to talk about the intense, almost obsessive biological science required just to keep the human body running in an environment this unforgiving. Have you ever heard of rabbit starvation? It is a very real, very dangerous biological threat. In cold environments, trying to survive on lean meat alone is actually deadly. It causes a condition where a body fed almost exclusively on lean protein without any fat or carbohydrates just slowly breaks down from the inside. And that happens no matter how much of that meat you eat. But ancient humans seemingly understood this intuitive nutritional science. They didn't just throw bones away, they cracked them open with surprising, consistent precision to extract the calorie-dense marrow hidden inside. They were basically treating it like an ancient, high-fat energy bar.
But hey, staying fueled wasn't just about the food. It also meant developing this incredibly detailed mental map of water across huge, sprawling territories. In a world with zero plumbing, they had to memorize exactly which water sources reliably dried up, which ones froze solid, and which ones became dangerously contaminated during certain seasons. They literally used the entire ecosystem as an instruction manual, tracking animal migration footprints and digging for hidden groundwater just to stay hydrated.
Now, securing all that much-needed fat and meat required extreme, highly risky coordination. This wasn't some lone wolf hunter sneaking through the brush with a single spear. No, this was a masterclass in mass choreography. They used tight, complex group communication, along with fire and loud noises, to deliberately panic and drive entire herds of massive bison right off cliff edges. They engineered the landscape itself into a giant trap, heavily relying on perfect timing. The result? An enormous, though temporary, surplus of calories for the whole group.
Of course, sometimes those hunts failed, and all options ran out, and I have to point out soberingly that under the grim calculus of extreme starvation, biology occasionally overrode cultural taboos. Researchers have actually found rare cut marks on certain ancient human bones that are consistent with deliberate butchery. Now, this was almost certainly never a common thing or some casual dietary choice. It was an absolute, desperate, last resort response to catastrophic famine. It's a dark reality that really reminds us how terrifyingly thin the line was between survival and total collapse.
Section 3. Mastering elements. Active manipulation.
Let's step up to the next tier of survival. This is where humans stopped just passively reacting to the cold and started actively manipulating their world. Making fire from absolute scratch using just friction and stones, that takes a ridiculous amount of hard-earned patience. But once they had it, it was a total game changer. They used fire to harden the tips of wooden spears, making them way more durable. They intentionally cleared land to manage local ecosystems and attract prey. And because starting a fire was such a massive chore, they actually physically transported glowing embers across long distances in specialized protective containers. Just imagine the anxiety of being the person holding that container. If you let that single ember die on a multi-day journey, your entire group might freeze.
They also developed what we can really only call ancient climate control. Through pure trial and error observation, they figured out that snow actually traps pockets of air, so they used it as functional insulation, very much like modern igloos. In different environments, they deliberately dig out underground dirt shelters to take advantage of the Earth's natural geothermal insulation. This kept them noticeably warmer in the brutal winter and cooler in the summer. It was basically an early, dirt-based version of the modern furnace and air conditioning.
This next step is a massive technological leap. You see, you just cannot survive an Ice Age winter with bare skin and good intentions. Loosely draped hides might keep you kinda warm, but they leave tons of drafty gaps for the freezing wind to cut right through. The real game changer was tailored clothing. Ancient humans developed tiny, intricate sewing needles carved straight from bone. They threaded them with animal sinew to create layered, fitted garments that were stitched together deliberately to hug the body and completely block out the wind.
So, here's the crucial question. How do we figure out exactly when this massive fashion revolution happened? I mean, textiles and furs rot away over thousands of years, right? So how do archaeologists track the history of ancient wardrobes without the actual clothes? Well, it leads us to a wonderfully gross piece of evidence. Stick with me here, because this is genuinely so clever. Researchers study lice, specifically clothing lice. By measuring the genetic evolutionary divergence between human head lice and human body lice, which specifically adapted to live inside fabric rather than on exposed skin, scientists can estimate roughly when our ancestors started wearing fitted clothing on a regular basis. A literal parasite's evolutionary timeline acts as an accidental historical record for human fashion. Incredible, right?
Section 4. The Deadly Lab. Trial and Error Science.
We're entering a phase of trial and error that was completely unforgiving. Everyday life was quite literally a life-or-death experiment. Ancient humans actively created a highly lethal arsenal. In southern Africa, evidence shows they meticulously extracted poison from specific beetle larvae, or even toxic plants, and applied those extracts right to the tips of their arrows. This meant even a minor graze became a reliably lethal hit on an animal. And alongside that chemistry, they mastered physics. The atlul, or spear thrower, looks like a simple stick with a hook on the end, but it functions as a brilliant lever. It dramatically increased the speed and range of a thrown spear. This completely changed the math of survival, allowing hunters to strike large, dangerous prey from a much safer distance.
But figuring out all this chemistry, knowing exactly what was toxic and what wasn't, involved a pretty brutal process we can informally call sampling. Long before the internet or FDA warning labels, finding out which plants were safe cost real human lives. Take cassava, for example. It's a staple food today, but it is severely toxic if you eat it raw. Through generations of incredibly painful trial and error, our ancestors miraculously developed a complex, multi-step chemistry process. They figured out that by soaking the plant, fermenting it, and then carefully cooking it, they could neutralize those natural toxins and turn a deadly root into safe, edible calories.
And when things went wrong, they had answers for that, too. There's incredibly clear evidence of ancient medical intervention. These weren't just injuries left to heal however they fell. Skeletal records show bone fractures that were deliberately set and stabilized. They performed amputations with such careful post-injury care that the limbs healed completely cleanly. There's even undeniable evidence of trepanation. That is the practice of deliberately drilling or scraping holes directly into the human skull using stone tools. And here's the kicker. Because we see healthy bone regrowth around these holes, we know for a fact these patients actually survived these high-stakes, unanesthetized brain surgeries for years afterward.
Section 5. Our ultimate weapon, social survival.
So we've reached the climax of our explainer. We've talked about mammoth houses, poison arrows, and bone needles. But the greatest survival tool wasn't a physical object at all. It was deeply social. You know, the phrase survival of the fittest gets misused all the time to imply this ruthless individual competition. The whole myth of the lone alpha male surviving against all odds. But the actual ancient survival data paints a totally different picture. It was really survival of the most cooperative.
Group living meant shared warmth, shared childcare, and most importantly, accumulated knowledge. Skeletal evidence clearly proves that groups actively cared for members with serious physical disabilities for years. They provided food and protection long after those individuals couldn't physically contribute to a hunt.
And how did they pass down all this hard-won, shared knowledge without any written textbooks? Well, they built what we can basically consider an oral internet. Storytelling wasn't just some casual campfire entertainment. It was a highly practical, incredibly efficient data storage system. By wrapping critical, life-saving information into emotional, highly memorable narratives, like a scary story about an uncle who died from eating a specific red berry, or a tale about a river spirit that floods without warning, they were reliably passing down vital search engine results to the next generation. They were literally programming their kids with the exact data of what in the world would kill them.
So when we look back at that mammoth bone dome we started this whole journey with, it isn't just a shelter. It's a monument. A monument to our ancestors' incredibly stubborn cooperation and cumulative knowledge. Next time your Wi-Fi goes out and you feel like it's the end of the world, just remember there were ancient humans building furniture-grade architecture out of dead megafauna fueled by pure spite directed squarely at the cold. Which really leaves us with one final, pretty amazing question to consider. If early humans could conquer an entire ice age using only raw cooperation and spoken stories, what are we truly capable of with the collective knowledge of the modern world sitting right at our fingertips? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep staying curious.